Right, well, session 2. I'm going to have to apologise once more for the amount you're listening to me rabbit on today. I hope that was a useful session, first one. That was kind of obviously more policy-focused, more kind of aimed at policy making, I guess, and what the challenges are. This session is far more kind of practically focused, I think, talking about the challenges for SMEs, what the kind of issues are, what the opportunities are, what we can do now, what we need to see to kind of encourage us to do more. So, to kind of begin, I'm going to ask our brilliant panelists to introduce themselves. I'm going to also just start by saying we've had apologies from Vinnika Haksma from PwC, who is sick today, unfortunately, and so didn't even make it to Glasgow. She's still in the Netherlands, I believe. So we've got 3 brilliant panelists, and we shall begin. Ed.
So, hello everyone, I'm Ed Lockhart. I run something called the Broadway Initiative, which is an alliance of business groups supporting businesses on climate and environment, and British Chambers of Commerce is right at the centre of that.
Hi everyone, I'm Lydia Elliott and I work for something called the We Mean Business Coalition, which is a group of 7 NGOs all working together on the kind of interface of policy and corporate climate action. But the real thing that I work on, which is why I'm here today, is called the SME Climate Hub, which is an initiative helping SMEs sign up to a credible net zero commitment. We've got 2,600 SMEs so far across 80 countries. And so really what I do is trying to find the right tools and resources to help support them on their net zero journeys.
Hi, I'm Catherine Burkitt. So I am a CFO of a business called Go Cardless, which actually supports payments for around 65,000 SMEs in the UK. And we're very much focused. We're also a founding member of Tech Zero, which was an initiative started by Bulb, but it's got a lot of various tech companies sort of also supporting that. But one of the big things that we're trying to do and very focused on is not just our own kind of commitment to net zero, which we're very much signed up to, but also helping SMEs get there and advising our customers on how to go on their own net zero journey.
Thanks very much. So, I mean, even before I kind of ask any questions, I think one of the first observations I have listening to what you all do is about collaboration. You've got 2 of you from a kind of specific collaboration initiatives, and one of you saying that you are doing a lot of work with other businesses. I think that's kind of leads me to my first question, really, which is what's the importance of particularly SMEs working together on this? Ed, should we begin with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the challenges in getting to net zero are huge. And they depend entirely what you do, what it is that you're doing. And I wanted to start by making this very practical in terms of sort of what it means. So if you have buildings, they need to be decarbonised. So that means making the fabric highly efficient and changing the source of fuel. If you rely on transport, whether that's public or private, that needs to be non-fossil fuel energy as well. We're already on the journey for electric cars, but we're going to move into HGVs, shipping, aviation, and aviation might well not get to net zero by 2050. If as a business you use energy for process heat or to power machinery, that needs to come from non-fossil fuel sources. If you farm or use food in your business, then inevitably you emit nitrous oxide for crops or methane for cattle. These can be reduced but not eliminated. So then in terms of your supply chains, these need to be decarbonised as well by reducing the same set of things. So there are a few things there that couldn't get to net zero. So then we need removals to take carbon out of the atmosphere, things like trees and other carbon removal technologies. So this effectively means changing how the whole economy is powered. So some of that can be done for us, huge changes in centralised power, decarbonisation of the grid over the next decade. For almost all businesses, it means changing buildings, transport, supply chains. For some businesses, it means completely changing your business model. If you made combustion engines, moving to batteries, something else. So huge changes, huge opportunities. Circling back to your point about collaboration, these challenges can only be done if we plan and work together. And I think if we can do that, actually this transition can be hugely positive.
Nice, easy list of things to begin with then. No problem. Lydia, do you want to come on that?
Yeah, of course. So I think there's lots of spaces for SMEs to collaborate together on taking action. So one of them is just by encouraging their network of SMEs that they know to also take action. That's one key thing, because we have really brilliant first mover SMEs that are part of the hub, and I think part of their role is to then encourage their networks of businesses to take action. Another one is to learn from each other. So when we're looking at kind of the top places that SMEs on the hub are learning from, where are they getting their information, how are they learning about net zero, how are they learning how to take action, one of the top 3 is their peers. So seeing what their peers are doing. So one of the things I really want to do in 2022 is create a community within the hub where SMEs can talk to each other and learn from their peers. If somebody's done it, can they help unlock the kind of key criteria for a different SME across the globe? So that's so I really think like encouraging each other and then learning from each other, and then, as you say, shared problems. And one SME is probably another SME's solution to some of these really tricky net zero problems that we're facing.
Yeah, I mean, I think collaboration is going to be absolutely key, but also I think it's really important when thinking about an SME type business. And I was thinking, coming back from my own background, if you'd have asked me a year ago around what a lot of the terminology means and what it actually means to get to net zero, honestly, I would not have had a clue what a Scope 1 to a Scope 3 emission was and what the difference is. Once I was asked to take responsibility for sustainability in my role as CFO, I took it on myself to do the Cambridge course and sort of learnt a lot about that. And it's very clear that there's lots of confusion around how you get there, how you measure it, and what we want to do as part of our kind of ethos, because Go Catalyst is kind of a very ethical business, but also to help our customers understand some of that terminology. And we really want to help support their growth, because it's, we are successful as a payments business if our customers are successful. And I firmly believe that you've got to have economic growth alongside sustainability, and those two things have to go together. And so we are actually a very sustainable payment methodology, much better than using a credit card, because obviously credit cards have plastics involved. So then again is something that we can really help our customers kind of reduce their own carbon emissions or their own emissions to get effectively also have a path to net zero. But we want to do that by getting everybody to talk to each other. And that's certainly part of the Tech Zero initiative as well, which is bringing a lot of big technology businesses together to collaborate and to really work out how you get a strategy, how we're going to all think about it, bring more people on board, have calculators available for people to use, rather than necessarily paying, consultants, which, is clearly not something that most SMEs could do, or even, technology startups. So I think, that working together is just got something that's got to happen. And it's not, of course, just in the UK. It's a global thing where we've all got to work together to drive towards this being, something that just has to happen, in my opinion.
Thanks, that's really useful. I think, obviously, clearly, immediately we can hear about the power of collaboration. I obviously would recommend the initiatives that each of these 3 guys are here to represent, I guess. Really, really worth looking at. I think it kind of leads me to all these practical questions to the big one, which is an immediate thing. We hear lots of talk about 2050, 2040, whatever. Lots of big businesses talking about targets that are very ambitious, 2030 net zero, whatever. What are the kind of immediate things that a business can do that aren't too cumbersome, aren't too expensive to kind of get them on the journey? Because it's taking that first step, as we've seen from our own research, which is really significant. And a lot of businesses, even once you get past the finance hurdle, are still struggling with the knowledge hurdle. And it's interesting to hear that from Catherine. So what would you say, the 3 of you, are kind of the things that you can start doing immediately? Let's go the other way. Let's start with Catherine.
So I think probably the easiest is to look at your energy supply, because that's quite, it is relatively straightforward to get that switch to a renewable source, and probably not at that much more significant cost, particularly when you look at what's going on in that world as it sits today. And I firmly hope anyway that, a lot of the green energy and alternate energy providers, not everybody succumbs to the current crisis that's going on. So I think you start with the really straightforward things, and things that are in your control. So maybe things like travel. trying to get your business bought in to a sustainable travel agenda and policy. So I think it's about having things that, you know, are kind of easy for everybody to understand and easy to commit to. I think once you get into the more sort of, you know, it depends on your suppliers. Say if you use Google Cloud or whatever, they have a sustainable product that you can buy versus buying their sort of normal cloud storage. So there are different things you do. So I think you look at those simple things. But as a, you know, ultimately an accountant originally, and having been a CFO for many years, I think, you know, having steps to get and having reasonable targets. There's no point saying I'm going to be net zero in 5 years if that's just clearly, utterly impossible. I think having targets in the near term that are achievable is a way that you sort of then go on a path that ultimately will mean that you get there, because just having a target set out into the future means there's a big chance that you're going to fail if you've not set yourself a near-term target, because that's the way that you kind of any sort of finance or driven person sort of thinks about things.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and certainly something we've heard time and time again in recent times is, you know, particularly smaller businesses who've really suffered in the last 18 months saying, well, you know, I can't think about 2050 when I'm more worried about getting through the next year. So I think that's a really important consideration, is setting more kind of bite-sized targets, if you like, in the nearer future. And if Lydia, you had anything to come in on?
Yes, so I mean, this is what I've been thinking about for the last 4 months. So we've been trying to find the right tools, build the right tools and resources to kind of help take an SME from just getting started to being able to take those first tangible steps. So the 3 things that are coming in. One is a carbon calculator where they can immediately see in their sector, in their country, what their carbon emissions probably look like. So just immediately, which I think is really helpful, because that measurement piece is really key to knowing where you take the action. And then we've been creating a course with BSR and CISL to try and help take an SME from not knowing very much about this topic to knowing enough to really think about which areas they should be taking action in. You know, be that in their operations, be that in their supply chain, be that in their kind of messaging and communication. So how do they take the right actions across their business and make business sense? And then the third one is more around financial support. So how can you guide SMEs towards the right avenues to get financial support? Because it's often a blocker. So about 50% of our SMEs say that they need to access financial support to take some of the steps towards net zero. So we've been trying to put together a package that means that when an SME lands and commits, they then have the right tools to get started. Because also, like, I mean, those are great examples of like immediate actions they could take, and it's really sectoral as well. So for some SMEs, it may be, you know, completely different things than even we can imagine about what their first action should be. So yeah, so that's what we've been thinking lots about over the last year, is how to put together that package so that an SME can kind of come and understand immediately what they need to do and get to know some of the, you know, issues and kind of ways everybody talks about it, so that they can kind of get their teeth into the subject.
And I think, Ed, I'll come to you on that, particularly the sectoral thing. I think something we found speaking to businesses in the UK and in our global networks is that this term SME is very, very useful in some senses, but actually quite unhelpful when thinking about kind of policy or markets or whatever, because, you know, a hairdresser, a high street hairdresser, which has 5 employees, has completely different issues to a accounting firm which has 5 employees, but they both come under that same bracket. And so a catch-all carbon calculator doesn't particularly help them very much. It's that really targeted approach of where exactly your emissions are, and I know that's something that you're looking at Broadway.
Thanks very much, Ben. Yeah, no, so one of the things we're doing is working with the sectoral business organisations on their roadmaps to get to net zero. So whether that's you know, retail, homes, waste, water, working with 11 of the major sectors, basically to plot out where you need to be when. What are the key transition dates? What are the phase-out dates? What are your key dates over that period of time, whether it's to get to net zero by 2050 or some date before that if you need to do that? And then what are the enabling steps to get there? What do you need from government? So it's that sort of roadmap approach. And I think that's, that's what I'd say is sort of probably another thing businesses can do immediately, is actually work out not just the things they can sort of practically implement today, but get a clear sense of what the journey looks like, so they can start planning, so they can start factoring it into investment cycles, asset replacement cycles, so that it suddenly becomes something that can be, you know, positive and planned, rather than a bit sort of scary and unknown.
Thanks. Yeah, and I going back to what Siobhan said at the very start, customers want this more and more, and I think that we hear the term greenwashing a lot. It's really important that businesses are able to do these things confidently and can act confidently. And a lot of that, I think, in my experience, be interested to hear yours, comes from the lack of communication. I think, it's interesting, Lydia, you said you kind of referenced finance initiatives. A lot of SMEs are saying, well, actually, it's a lack of access to finance, which is my blocker. And so maybe part of our job is to help governments communicate that better, because at the moment there's just that kind of information gap. But kind of thinking more broadly, and this is the big issue, I think, in the net zero piece for businesses, is this Scope 3 issue, which refers, for people who aren't interested in technical jargon, because why would you be, quite frankly, refers to the emissions up and down your supply chain. And I think this is the big problem, not only for SMEs, but for big businesses, is how, as an SME, you get to net zero across your supply chain, but even as a big company, how you can claim to be legitimately to be net zero by, say, 2030, if you have X suppliers, many of whom can't even begin to access this agenda. So I guess my question is, what are the challenges of the Scope 3 kind of problem, let's say? How can we work together to start tackling it? And I guess, more widely, what do we need to see from governments to help us move towards the scope, to kind of solving the Scope 3 problem? Let's go for you first, Ed.
So I think, again, there's terms here that are quite difficult to get your head around. But the way I like to think about it is that Scope 3 and the fact that everyone's, Scope 3 emissions need to get to net zero, basically mean that all of your supply chain, their own direct emissions, need to get to zero. So effectively, it means everyone in the economy needs to get to zero. But I think one of the ways I think you can start thinking about that is, again, to look at specific sectors. And if it's home building, for example, how can the large home builders work with their supply chains to really work out what does a new home look like? How do you reduce what they call embodied carbon? How do you get all of the products to zero, and start working collaboratively in those kind of with the sort of end user, and everything back along that supply chain to make sure that the whole supply chain gets to net zero in a smooth way. But that's partly about the home builder, or whoever's sort of at the end of the supply chain, giving clear signals about what products they're going to want. So there's time for supply chains to adapt and start supplying the right products.
Yeah, so I don't know, Scope 3 and supply chains, it's a complex issue, particularly for a multinational, I think, because if you're a massive multinational company, you have this really complex web of tens of thousands of suppliers that go out across the world and then go to other suppliers, and it seems kind of a bit daunting when you look at it. But I think that it's not as daunting when you begin to think about it as everybody's supply chain, as they're all mixed together. It's not just yours. This is the whole ecosystem of the world's supply chains. So I think, that daunting factor definitely puts people off, as well as the jargon. And then I think there's an issue around measurement and how we get the measurement to a good place. The measurement's really technical. It's not quite there yet. So how, in 5 years' time, I think it's going to look a lot better. It's going to be a lot easier. And then not letting the fact that it's complex and the measurement isn't totally there yet to trip you over and not start taking action now, because there are tangible, real actions you can take. There are suppliers you can partner with, there are peers you can partner with to do things, there are all sorts of things you can do to drive down your Scope 3 emissions just now. So working on the measurement and the action in tandem would be one of my first things. And then for SMEs, I think it's really tricky. So I think it's taking some of the complexity out and saying, hey, yes, it's really complicated, but these are like the 2 or 3 key actions I can take. And that's a really nice way for SMEs to start looking at it, rather than all of the different Scope 3 categories and it getting very, very complicated.
And Catherine, so be interested to your experience as a business.
Yeah, so I think basically there's 2 things. I definitely agree with measurement and kind of getting consistency around how we measure everything, and the same sort of ethos being applied across all different businesses is really important. But I think, the more and more it needs to become part of what every business does, that we all have an obligation effectively to report our carbon emissions number, so that then, we're kind of putting it as a payments business. At the moment, we're going to make public in our report sort of this year what our costs per transaction is, so that if you're using Go Cardless as a supplier, you will know what our carbon emissions are per transaction. That's a very easy thing for an SME to convert into their own numbers because they'll know they're processing this number of payments, so therefore it's just straight multiplication. And I think it's, we've got to all sort of drive towards having that very clear reporting. And obviously the ESG reporting goes somewhere to do that, but we need to get that enforced, and probably a lot quicker really than than it's being talked about in some areas, because it needs to be all businesses, private or public, not just an obligation on public, or larger corporates. And I think that is super important, so that then you just know, and you also that we've all got to have the confidence to ask both our suppliers, and also to tell our customers, this is what our cost is, and that just becomes a way of doing business. And I think the more and more that is, and that everybody accepts that that's the way that we're going to go, as I said, I believe that if you're going to be a successful business of the future, you absolutely have to have sustainability at the core of your agenda. And so I think that just has to be something we've all got to get used to, and not actually to be embarrassed to ask for that number and think, oh gosh, this guy's a big guy, dare ask for it. Actually, it just becomes part and parcel of what you do.
Absolutely, and I think it's interesting to hear everything you're saying. I think it leads me back to my other question, which is that we hear a lot, and quite rightly, it's the private sector that's driving this. It's the private sector that's driving the innovation behind it. For SMEs who are struggling with this, is it the case that we should wait for governments to do something to create more of a framework, or should we do something that makes government kind of move markets in the right direction? I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I'll leave that one open. Whoever wants to jump in first.
So, I mean, personally, I think government has a really strong role here in terms of creating the framework. And I think, the net zero strategy published a week ago, and from a UK perspective, from a Westminster perspective, I think is the sort of first time we've seen the whole picture. And I think, that to some extent starts to tell businesses where they need to be by when. I think it's then for the business community to say to government, actually, we haven't got enough clarity here. Totally reinforce Siobhan's comment from earlier about the need for policy clarity and where you need to be by when. And I think it's for right across the business community to say, right, that's a useful start. We need some more dates along the way. We need to know where we're going to be by when. I think it's also for government to make sure that the net zero path is cheaper. Is the cheaper path. I think agree with the points around finance. Need to make sure that particularly small businesses can access finance, and then to make sure that smaller businesses have the capacity. Larger businesses have sustainability departments, can work out all of this stuff. How do we do the job once and then communicate, what are the practical steps that businesses need to take? So there's a number of things there that government needs to do. But ultimately, they do need to provide the overall policy framework within which businesses can make this transition.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that, for me, the biggest help government can give to the SME community is to help support some of those key transitions that are quite costly. So to put in place funding or grants or different mechanisms to help SMEs make the changes they need to make. And that is very complex when you look at it, by country, by everything. So it's not a simple thing. But for me, that would unlock a lot of movement, and it would overcome some of those barriers. And at the moment, it's not there as much as it should be.
Yeah, no, I actually do believe government have got to take a lead on this. It's one of those areas which I think is so far-reaching that just to leave the government out completely wouldn't be the right thing. But I think as a business and somebody, we believe that we've got our own big plans and our own sort of ambitious plans around how to support the payments ecosystem, not just in the UK but internationally as well. We're really keen that we think about how we can most drive sustainable agendas across the piece. So actually, how do we make our pricing most competitive if we know that people are on a path to net zero, to supporting green financing, because obviously we allow you can collect loan repayments using Go Cardless. So again, to kind of really target those companies, perhaps think about offering better pricing to allow that to be cheaper. Ultimately, for if you are definitely sort of seriously on driving that green agenda. So we're very much in our infancy of thinking about these things, but we are going to try really to work out how we help sort of our customers with their own carbon sort of emissions numbers, but also ultimately to help support the wider economy, because obviously everybody needs to pay everybody, and to do it in the most green way is something that we're sort of really trying to drive.
Okay, that leads me nicely to my next one, really. I'd like to start with you, Catherine, as a business doing this work already, which is, we hear a lot about the difficulties and the struggles and the need for government to do X, Y, and Z. I think what we need more of, in my own view, is the positive case. and beyond the ethical, but also the business case for this. So I'd like to hear more about the opportunities that this creates for businesses.
Yeah, so I mean, I think obviously it depends, people have said it earlier, clearly there are some industries that, you cannot do anything other than an absolute massive transformation that probably means they're not going to be as profitable to get to a green agenda. I mean, you can't get away from that. Not every business is going to be able to seamlessly move their kind of whole sort of business model to be in something that is also profitable in a green world. But I think, in a way, the whole economy is going that way. If we've not learned anything over the last 18 months, the way that you can actually operate without business travel, and I think we all have an obligation to push back if people say you need to be at a meeting. Do you really need to kind of go and do that flight and incur those emissions? So I think there's lots of stuff around that that you can really effectively overcome challenges. But it's clearly, I think that you can have sustainable economic growth. It's just about a change in the way that you do things. This is a kind of an absolute pivotal moment, I believe, in the same way that almost, say if you went, I actually also spent 18 years at a telecoms business, just as sort of the internet was just becoming a thing, and kind of grew up with that, and that's how I, spent most of my career. So kind of, again, you've got that real change in the way that businesses do things. I'm old enough to have said, if you'd have thought you were going to be paying everything online, these things were just things you couldn't even imagine. And I think that's where we've got to get to, that you'll end up where you can, and we all need to prove that you can be a profitable business as well as having, the green agenda, and ensure that it's not just out there that this is a cost, that actually it's a real positive thing, and it's a positive thing that actually probably you're going to attract more customers, because customers and consumers are going to care that you are a green business. I absolutely believe that. I mean, the younger generation, I've got 2 teenage daughters, firmly are behind all this, and they want to know that things are sustainable, their clothing comes from sustainable, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that is something that will happen naturally. So you've got to realise that if you're going to be, you've got to be there in the future in the same way that everybody started and moved to a digital world. This is kind of the next thing on that effectively we're all going to move to a sustainable world.
Yeah, I'd say the business case is really clear in some ways. There's cost savings through some of the efficiency measures, and then there's a real sense of, I completely agree, growing your brand and speaking to your customers. So it's about 72% of our SMEs, so let's say that's one of their main drivers of why they're signing up, why they're making climate commitments, why they're taking climate action, is to enhance their reputation with their customers. And it's really that simple. The only thing that trumped that was that they felt it was doing the right thing, which was about 96%. So I think there's a real business case. You can make all the technical business cases internally about your operations and money saving, but there's also a business case of like talking to your customers, be that businesses or consumers on the ground, and using it as a way to sell your product, to grow your brand, to change your business, to go towards net zero.
So I think I absolutely agree with those points. I think, I'd like to talk as well as sort of decarbonising your own business, is the opportunities that particularly small businesses have as suppliers of the solutions. This is a transition that is going to be a global transition. All countries are signing up, as we speak, we hope, to getting to net zero. It's a massive industrial revolution. There are going to be huge changes, and that changes in ways of doing things, and huge new products, huge new ways of doing things, and small businesses can be at the forefront of that. I think there are real risks that it sort of big companies go to other big companies because it's easier for solutions and to sort of use sort of slightly yesterday's solutions. And if we're really going to be, we need to be radical, and small businesses need to find the ways of being disruptive and finding their ways into selling their innovative products into the market. So I mean, great work in East Lancashire and other parts of Britain in terms of sort of fostering some of those innovations. But I think that's what we need to get really good at, is how can small businesses be the ones that are providing the solutions, not just in Britain but abroad as well.
Absolutely. And as you say, hopefully the Prime Minister hasn't committed us to something insane or done something mad, as we will find out when we leave the room. I think kind of beyond that, I think it's also worth kind of mentioning that kind of for politicians, going back to the government piece, for politicians, that innovation drives jobs and skills, and that's a kind of a huge incentive to be able to kind of talk to a voting public about about what this can do and the job opportunities and therefore the economic opportunities. And I think that is another economic opportunity for businesses to be able to create growth in that way, to create skills and to create jobs. One thing I'm going to come back to the kind of the communication point, but I wanted to ask something that I get asked a lot, which is about the working from home thing. And I'd be interested to hear, again, kind of from a business point of view, what your views are on the benefits of working from home, the issues of working from home. From a green point of view, does that affect the business? So kind of open that up to the three of you.
I think it's one of the things that's really hard about everybody working from home is actually calculating what your emissions are. Because if you've got everybody coming into the office, you can actually do a calculation that says, these people are making this regular journey on the transport, and we know what our office emissions are, so we know what we're using. The moment you move that into the home and you're thinking, well, okay, now I'm sat at home 3 days a week, where I never dreamt of doing that 2 years ago, and my heating's now on all day, and of course it necessarily wasn't. And so you've got all these things and it's a very individual thing because some people might not, everybody lives in different size houses, etc., etc. So then it's very much harder for you actually to establish kind of what your measurement is when you've got people in a more disparate way. That being said, I think probably weighing everything up, I think the balance, look, I still believe there are meetings that are better held in person than on camera, for sure. As an executive, I think Zoom fatigue is a real thing. You can sit on, Zoom meetings. My diary is basically meetings. So if I'm just working from home, I am literally on a camera for, sort of 8 hours every single day. And sometimes I've been on, 10, 12-hour meetings on a camera, and it's exhausting in a way that physical meetings just aren't quite the same. So I think there is definitely benefits from both a business perspective and from kind of mental health perspective too, that you go and you meet people on occasion. But I think that balanced way of working, I think the real thing is stopping the need to travel unnecessarily for things. So therefore saying, that business meeting, does it really have to be in person? Do I really have to, can I take more time to get there as well, potentially, and do it in a different way? I think it's changing those things that's probably most important. And I think we are all going to adapt to a new flexible way of working. But that calculation of emissions in a home is still going to be a big issue until we all actually take responsibility for saying, this is my own personal kind of, carbon number, and using that then to calculate what the workplace is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I probably speak for everyone when I say that we often see meetings and think, does that need to be an hour on camera? But there we are. That's my own problem. I kind of going back to the communication thing. I think one of the issues, as we discussed, is this long-termism of net zero, which is a necessary thing, and it's all this talk of kind of whole economy transformation. And it's going back to this kind of really kind of granular stuff, which is how in that context can a business start to communicate confidently now, talking about how customers are interested in this, the business case of this, how can we start kind of really confidently communicating that we are taking action on this, even if it's only small, and how can we kind of encourage both our customers and our employees, who are increasingly concerned that their own companies are taking the right decisions, to kind of incorporate that into what we're doing and how we're speaking to customers. Let's start with you, Ed.
I think it's really hard because we're right at the beginning of this journey. We've only just had the net zero strategy. It's really hard to know what it means in practice to get to net zero. We have some wonderful examples. I can see Richard from Crystal Doors there, who has one of the leading stories of this is how I've done it as a business, and others can follow. So I think in the very short term we need to pick out and champion the people that are doing it and highlight them as examples. I then think we need pretty rapidly to work out what that looks like in the mainstream. What does that journey look like for any type of business, and communicate that. But I think in the short term, it's really hard as a business because you're lots of terms, COP26, net zero, all of these things. You don't know what it means, and I think we just need to get very rapidly into that space where we can communicate very clearly to any individual business about what it means now, medium term, long term, and give them the confidence and the tools to be able to communicate that to others.
Yes, so I think I completely agree, and I also think that one of the reasons we set the commitment up the way we did is that it has, for the SME Climate Hub, it has both. So it has halve your emissions by 2030 and then get to net zero by 2050, 2040 or 2030, and SMEs can pick. At the moment, about 80% pick 2040 or earlier, which is great to see that kind of ambition and drive. So I think there's something about having near-term targets and near-term action plans as well. And that all links together because then you know what you're doing. So you know what you're doing, you know your near-term target, you know your near-term action plan, and it helps bring that confidence as you talk to your employees and your customers that you actually know tangibly what you're doing, and it also helps translate it from net zero by 2040, or 2050, which is a very philosophical, theoretical thing, into these are the practical 5 steps we're taking, and that's a lot easier thing to communicate to your employees and customers. So that's...
Yeah, I think one other thing as well we haven't actually touched on, but I think has got a big part to play in this, particularly when you're talking about the startup world or the SME world, is the role that investors have to play. And that they, it needs to become part of the course that an investor wants to know kind of what's your green strategy, how are you making sure that you take sustainability into your agenda, whether that's seed financing or, moving up the stack through VCs, through growth funds. I think the more and more, because obviously that's where, we are still a loss-making business, very open about that. We're driving our growth by investment, and we have great shareholder backing. But it is important, I think, that community, which is obviously really successful, particularly in the UK as well, actually starts to ask these questions of its investments and its businesses, in the sense that, we're not even going to consider you if you're not actually going to have this as part of your agenda, not just having a great product, but also one that's very green and sustainable. I think that then also helps to communicate out more. And I think the other thing I'd say is that, and we do encourage this, we have a Slack channel where employers are allowed to kind of just talk openly about sustainability, about things that we should be doing that perhaps we're not, and to ensure that there's a feedback loop where they see something that, wait a minute, you're saying you've got this agenda, and actually I've seen this happen over here, doesn't feel quite right, whatever that is. And I think that having those things and that open communication both ways, that your employees feel that they can call out these things, is super important.
I think that the finance point, the next session is on sustainable finance, but it's a really, really big part of it, of course, and I think it also relates to the kind of suppliers issue, doesn't it, of who you're working with and how you kind of move that message up and indeed down your supply chain. I think that's really useful. I think we'll just kind of wrap up with, I'd like to kind of ask you all a kind of on-the-spot question. I can see you wincing, but it relates to what I was saying earlier, really, which is that this is a tricky thing we've heard. If you can kind of give everyone here one key message to take away, one key thing that they can do tomorrow, if they sit down at their desks tomorrow, what would that be? Let's start with you, Ed. Sorry.
No, not at all. I think sometimes repetition is helpful to get messages across. So for me, I think the one thing you can do is almost map out where you need to be by when. What are your key dates in getting to net zero in terms of switching to electric cars, switching your buildings, switching the various things you need to do. So just have that picture, so then you can start planning in more detail. That'd be my single thing.
He's stolen the first one. What's next?
I'd have to say, for me, as this panel's all around small businesses, it would be to get any small businesses, to come sign up to the SME Climate Hub. But that's just because we've got some great tools and resources coming over the next month, and I really think they're going to be incredibly helpful for small businesses starting off on that journey. So we really would love to have more small businesses join the community and start helping them on their kind of initial journey towards net zero.
So I would actually definitely support that, and I would say go to anybody that's got a tool out there. We're actually also looking at putting one on our website as well for all of our own customers or not. So again, I think it's all about us working together, so I think that is super important. And then selfishly as well, I'd say look at your payments, see if you can use Go Cardless. I'm obviously going to say that, but any business that's going to help to make that whole thing more efficient and cheaper, but also greener. And I think, pick one thing in your business where you think actually that is not, I can tell, and it may be your energy. It may be the fact that you've got lots of people doing air travel, depending on what you're doing. I mean, there's so many different things that it could be for your own business, but I think you pick that one thing and you say, this is my short-term 6-month goal, which I think is the kind of point you were making, that you need to have things that are very achievable, because I do worry a lot about people saying, I'm only going out here to 2030 or 2040. It's absolutely important you've got a plan, but you've also really got to have a near-term goal, and we've all got to make those steps. There's no point in saying we're going to be net zero by, say, whatever year you pick, if you get to the year before and you've not made that progress. And it's so important that we've all got these little steps that you're making, and there's just a small positive progression every single year, and that will ultimately, I hope, get us there.
Thanks very much. I think that's really, really useful. I think my own takeaways are kind of 3 things really. One is that there are things we can do now. Whatever the size of our business, there are clearly actions we can take, large or small, now. One is that, as we've heard today, there are tools out there, and maybe they need to be communicated better by us, by government, whatever, but there are tools out there to help businesses start doing this work. And the last is that for people like BCC, there's clearly kind of concerns that we need to represent to policymakers to kind of make the markets better, essentially, to make it more incentivized that businesses can take action confidently now. I think that's really important. So that's really, really, really useful, interesting discussion. Thank you to the three of you very much for some really insightful, useful things. Does anyone have any questions? We do. I'll go to you first. You put your hand up first. Yeah, that's you. Sorry.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Just in terms of what challenge a little bit the kind of comments you made around finance and the barriers around that, and there's been a lot of discussion today around cost, but not about investment. How do you think the barrier to doing net zero actions being finance is actually around a misunderstanding of the benefits of going net zero as an investment to kind of build resilience into your business? Is it actually a lack of money, or is it a lack of understanding of the benefits of net zero?
Before anyone wants to jump in, I will say that we are going to have a sustainable finance roundtable in about 10 or so minutes. So I, of course, welcome to answer, but I can see the speakers in the other room. I'm going to punt that one over to them to think about for the next few minutes. They've got an answer ready, but if any of you want to jump in on that.
I mean, I'd say it's probably both. But looking at the experience of the SMEs, it's probably both. It's not knowing where to go, and it's also not having made all the plans within your business to really figure out exactly what you need. So
I'd echo that. I mean, in the sectors sort of we're beginning to look at, that it's not yet clear where, intuitively there are cost savings, but you haven't worked them out sufficiently to talk in a sort of credible way with the financiers. They're keen to know. I mean, like the likes of Lloyds have said by 2025 they're going to halve the impact of their loan book. I mean, they're sort of big drivers, but that we can't have a sort of sensible conversation yet because we haven't got enough knowledge yet.
I think there were some more questions. Should I take this gentleman in the front?
It's relatively simple in such as that by the time you get to 30, 40, 50, there will be a lot of businesses who are currently trading who won't be there. And there will be other businesses coming through. So is there a way in which the new people coming in are actually have an outline of this is what's expected to be a green business from the outset, rather than the existing business trying to play catch up? You're going to have new entrants. So the same as you have to be compliant with, say, Companies House or accounting standards or whatever, then it could be, yes, this is it. Because as you follow that through about energy, it may well influence on who you decide to support you. And if you're not careful, you could unknowingly, pick up a baddie, and it costs a lot of money, might even take you down because you didn't know. Whereas if it's a standard, maybe the finance people might say, we would expect a new entrant to be compliant.
Yeah, and I think something I'd say to that is immediately is that the net zero strategy in the UK last week, 10 days ago, is probably the first kind of whole economy plan in the world of its kind. So the answer to that is that I expect in the future that probably will be the case, that these frameworks are expected, but they are very, very fledgling at the moment. I will come back to that one. I'm just conscious of time, so I might just take two questions at once and kind of answer one. And I see at the back that you had a question.
Yeah, it's just I'm hearing a lot of strategy talk, but I'm not hearing a lot of integration into how you're actually going to manage a business on a day-to-day basis. It's all very well about having a framework and having a direction and an intent, but surely what you're talking about is fundamentally changing the way that you run your business on a day-to-day basis to embed all those initiatives. And how much of a challenge is that when you realise that your operating models have to change?
So two rather contrasting questions, one on future frameworks and one on actions right now. Should we go to you, Ed, first.
Can I pick up that's a really important point just about churn in the economy, just that things are going to change a lot in the economy, because I think in some ways we've been talking about in sort of quite a static world. So I think that's really important. I think then in terms of those sort of in terms of those businesses coming in, you probably don't want government or anyone centrally to say these are the solutions, these are the detailed solutions. But you do want them to say, well, this is what it needs to look like. You need to be sort of zero carbon, or this. These are the outcomes effectively. And then it's really for business entrepreneurship, innovation to work out the solutions. So one of the questions we were sort of playing around is how do we design the solutions for sustainable transport? I don't know. But actually, BCC's members do locally to really think about, how can we get, goods around the economy in a much more efficient way? What are reverse logistics? Clever solutions about how products get to the last mile, things like that. So I think it's for those coming in to really think creatively about those solutions once they know we need to be in a zero carbon or reduced by this amount by these dates. So I don't know if that's a fair answer to your question, but I think we need to leave space for that sort of innovation.
Entrepreneurs and innovators who will come up with the solutions which government may adjust the framework and bring out as, so hold your nose and dive in. But the concern is if you're looking for, nobody's mentioned it, if you're looking at jobs for the kids and the grandkids, who may well be the future, that will happen within the next 10, 20 years. So is that being addressed, or is it a case of, we've just allowed that supply chain to work its way through? Whereas if it's a case of, yes, it's being talked about in school, in the entrepreneurs hubs, supported by a chamber or whatever, to get them to be already thinking about the tuck shop. How green is the tuck shop, or whatever they call it these days?
I'd love to follow after, conscious.
Yeah, I'm just conscious of time, so this will probably be our last question if all of you wanted to come back on the gentleman at the back.
I think what is absolutely key is that you do take the step back to actually calculate what your emissions are today, because that then gives you a tangible plan to move forward. And actually, if you do, there are tools out there, as we've just said, that actually it's not, it feels like it's this huge task. How the hell am I going to, get there? But actually, if you go out there and you're looking, if you're an SMB, you go to the places like this. So if you're a bigger business, you can afford to kind of get somebody in to help you, or like we've done sort of as midway, we've just hired a head of sustainability who's kind of done that work for us. But actually doing that kind of calculation, so you know where you're at today. And then you've got a starting point. And then what's massively important, with any KPI, is you can measure it really easily and really regularly, so that then you can say, month by month, how am I tracking, what am I doing? Build that discipline into the way that you think about your business, either whether it's what your investors are asking of you or what you're doing. And absolutely, spot on, you've got to be able to operationalise this, otherwise it's never going to be working. It cannot absolutely just purely be a strategy and a theory about what's going to be out there in the future. And that's what I'm trying to get at when I'm saying, and maybe not being clear enough, is about thinking about those really small steps that you can take in the next year, and knowing that you're going to get a reduction that will eventually drive you down that path, but that actually one thing and getting going, and then celebrating it. Yeah, okay, we've managed to reduce our emissions by X, and we're on target, or whatever it is, and that becomes as much seen as a success as the top line growing whatever percentage that it's growing.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. It's always nice to finish on a positive note, as we didn't earlier. So I'd like to thank our three panellists. If we can give them a quick round of applause. I think, from my point of view, it's been really useful. Lots to take away. I think it, as important as ever, as we said at the start, is to continue working together. So I hope that we'll all kind of be in touch and be able to speak about these things openly and share these challenges. And yes, we'll look forward to seeing you in a few minutes to hear about sustainable finance. So thank you very much.